afternoon. I'm Pelles. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Engagement for the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at the Yale Divinity School. And I am so happy that we are all here together. So this panel this afternoon is focused on low wages, focused on union rights. It's an important panel. So I will begin. In the U.S., 52 million workers are in low-wage jobs. 21 million workers make less than $15 an hour. $7.25 remains the federal minimum wage. Only 12% of workers are in unions right now. And these numbers show that millions of hard-working men and women are being forced into poverty and into low wealth because of this, and that is shameful in the country where we're the richest nation in the world. Mm-hmm. And so it's because of that these are moral issues, that we're seeing that people don't make any money and that people don't have union representation. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We've got a panel of folks who know about this from every angle. They live it and they understand it. So let me take a minute to introduce the panel. And so I want to introduce first Laurel Ashton. Laurel is the lead coordinator and organizer with the Union of Southern Service Workers. It's a brand new, amazing union that covers the South. Pam Garrison is an organizer and leader with the West Virginia Poor People's Campaign, dynamic organizer. We have with us Reverend Dr. Willie Jennings, who is the Associate Professor of Systematic Theology and Africana Studies at Yale University Divinity School. And we have Dr. Heidi Shierholz, economist and president of the Economic Policy Institute. So please, let's welcome them. So I want to start right here with my friend, Dr. Jennings. I want to start with you. You're a theologian, a pastor. So when thinking about low wages and union rights, what are the biblical and theological resources and references you use to name these things as moral issues? You know, what does the Lord require?
Thank you, Ross, for your wonderful introductions, and it's a joy to be here and be a part of this fabulous beginning. It's great to be with my co-panelists. I'm so honored to be with them, but especially with this wonderful woman to my left, dear friends. Her picture ought to be on that wall. For all the students present, if you do not know who this is, Google her when you leave today, because you will want her autograph. This is an incredible person. So the question my dear sister asked, I think, is the crucial question for us. What does the Lord require? In point of fact, my friends, we are in a very profound struggle against one kind of economy in lieu of another. The kind of economy we're fighting against is an economy based in greed. And we need to oppose that with an economy based in grace. The reality of it is, for all of us in this room, we know this, but we need to remind ourselves of this. Labor in America has always been close to slavery. Labor in America has always been shaped by slavery. And what do we know about slavery? That's the reality of it from the very beginning. The ancient world was shaped by one fundamental truth. Nobody wanted to be a slave, and everybody wanted a slave. Everybody wanted somebody who they could extract from them their very life energies for their own good. And so we're in a place that continues to be haunted by the reality of slavery. And that reality shapes so much of the undercurrents as we talk about labor. What we have to remember is that we are inside of a different economic vision, one that understands the human person as gift, and a human person shaped in the gift that is this world, which opposes the idea of worth being tied to productivity. And here, I think it's important for us never to back away from the truth. Our worth should never be tied to our productivity. And productivity should never simply be tied to profit. If it is, it always will lead to what Marx called alienated labor. Ways of thinking about our work, distracted, pulled away, extracted from who we are. And so the challenge for us is to articulate a vision of economic life and a vision of wages and payment that is shaped in grace. An economy of grace is built on the truth of the rain. God allows the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. God allows food to be formed for the just and the unjust. God allows for us to live with air and the water we need for the just and the unjust. That's the basis for what we do. And that kind of way of thinking challenges the false meritocracy that imagines that I can measure a person's worth in such a way that I can define their labor and define their payment in as tight alignment to productivity as possible. When it comes to money and wages in this country, the fundamental question we have to ask is, what is fair? Is it fair for someone to make $10,000 a minute for their companies? Is it fair for somebody to be able to make decisions that would affect the lives of thousands upon thousands simply by their whims? Is it fair for people with so much to fight to give to people so little? And so we need a different vision of what fair is that moves us toward not only a shared economy, shared profit, but a way in which we guarantee to one another thriving life, flourishing life, not just enough to pay our bills. Let me just stop there because I could go on for the entire time, but there are other people I'm sure who have something to say.
So we'll come back to you. So Heidi, I want you to talk a little bit, or more than a little bit, about the political and economic landscape that creates the conditions in this country for low wages and the labor unionization.
Okay.
Can you talk about that?
Yep, totally. Okay, wait, yes? Yes, okay. All right, so one thing, just start with the sort of backdrop of what's going on in the economy right now, of like the backdrop where this conversation is happening, because there's so much misinformation out there. But talking about where we are in the, this isn't too loud, it's okay? It feels really loud to me. Okay, so what's going on in the economy right now has such important policy implications, and so I just want to talk about where we are for a second. So our economy is actually, our macroeconomy is actually very strong right now. The unemployment rate has been under 4% for more than 2 years. That never happens. Due to the broad impact of structural racism on labor market outcomes, the black unemployment rate is higher than the white unemployment rate, but the black unemployment rate is less than 6%. Like, that is also extremely low, like it's near record lows. The inflation, and prices are still high, but inflation has normalized. Like, we are no longer in the regime where we were getting like 8 or 9% inflation. Now it's back down to normal, sort of 2% inflation every year. Wages are growing faster than inflation, so workers are seeing real wage growth. And if you look over the last few years, this is unlike what we've been seeing in the 40 prior years. over the last couple of years, the workers who have gotten the biggest wage increases have been low-wage workers. Like, inequality has actually come down in the last couple of years. Racial wage gaps have narrowed in the last couple of years. And I am not saying everything is perfect, far, far from it, and I'll get into that a little bit, because this is where the importance of things like labor standards and unions really come in. But I do think it's really important for us to step back and celebrate the policy win that those numbers represent. Because the fact that we have such a strong macroeconomy right now was a policy choice. It did not have to happen this way. And we can look back to what happened in the aftermath of the Great Recession and see that it didn't happen that way. Like, in the aftermath of the Great Recession, policymakers did not act boldly, and as a result, we had 10 years of elevated unemployment, 10 years of weak wage growth. That kind of weak recovery just churns out inequality. It churns out racial inequity. It just churns out pain. And we avoided, the Biden administration, Congress, avoided that lost decade by taking bold policy action, by doing relief and recovery measures at the scale that was needed to really spur our strong jobs recovery. So that is a huge win, and I feel like we could take a second to just celebrate that. That's a good thing that happened. Okay. So let's quickly get to the other news, which is we have had a couple of years of declining inequality, but it is not enough to undo the prior 4 decades of skyrocketing inequality. So we still have very extreme inequality, huge racial economic inequities. We still have a large swath of our labor market working in like precarious low-wage jobs with few benefits. So there is still a lot of work to be done, and this is where things like strong labor standards and unions really come in. Like, we really need those laws to help balance the playing field. So just to name a couple, minimum wages. We need to raise the minimum wage. And when the Reverend was talking about how the tie between labor and slavery, the tipped minimum wage, there's such a direct link to slavery. It happened following the Civil War. White employers didn't want to pay black people, but they would let them work for tips. And so that's how the tip, like, there is this just very clear legacy of the tip minimum wage being very, very, I mean, at that point it was 0, but very, very low. The tip minimum wage right now, $2.13 an hour, and it has not been increased for more than 30 years. So there's still a ton of work to do. It's just employers know that low-wage workers have very little power, and they will exploit that to pay them as little as they possibly can. And so we need wages, we need strong minimum wage laws to make sure that even the lowest wage workers in the country have a decent wage. And then the other piece of that is we need strong enforcement of labor standards like the minimum wage. Billions of dollars are stolen every year from low-wage workers and from middle-wage workers by their employers for not paying them for the hours they work, not paying them for overtime that they are legally owed. The cost to workers of wage theft by their employers of this type I'm talking about is bigger than the entire cost of property crimes against everyone in the country. The entire cost of robberies, burglaries, larcenies, motor vehicle theft altogether, that is smaller than the amount that employers steal every year from workers, primarily low and middle wage workers. So we absolutely need enforcement of these laws also to make sure that we need not only strong labor standards, but strong enforcement of those standards. And then finally, and this is the last thing I'll say and I'll pass it over, we need to boost unionization. As Roz said, there's a very small share of workers in our economy that are actually unionized. That is not because workers don't want unions. There's a massive gap between the people who report they want to be in a union and people who are actually in a union, and that gap is policy. That gap is labor law not actually protecting workers' rights to organize. And that's where we really need to move. an individual worker doesn't have any power with respect to their employer, but when they join together with their coworkers, then they have leverage. That's what we need, people. That's what we need to build up that kind of worker power. And so, like, we need labor law reform. And just to give you an idea of just how weak labor law is in our country right now, it is technically illegal for an employer to fire a worker for union activity. That is protected. You are technically not able to fire a worker for that, but it happens all the time, and it happens all the time because there are basically no consequences to firing a worker for union activity. Right. If you fire a worker, if an employer is found guilty of firing a worker for union activity, the worst that can happen to them is that they have to reinstate that worker, pay them their back wages, minus any wages they earned at a different job in the meantime. It's just like, it is not even, exactly, that's the right reaction. It's not even a slap on the wrist. Like, it's nothing. It's just the cost of doing business. And that's an example of just how our labor law does not protect a worker's right to organize. And so that's just, that's another piece of where we need to go to get us to an economy that works for everyone. Where low and middle income people share in the overall economic growth of the economy.
Right. Really good. Thank you. So I just have a question that has to do with the landscape and wondering what was the impact of the pandemic on these statistics and on workers' rights and low wages?
It's been remarkable. Like, I did not think what happened was actually going to happen. So in the first few months of the pandemic, it was terrible. We saw more job loss than we had ever seen, like just millions and millions and millions losing their job within a couple of months. But we took the policy action. People came back, and even, you would say, well, we were going to have a rebound in job growth just because people were temporarily laid off and then brought back on. But even after that dynamic slowed down, that's when we came in, that's when the Biden administration came in with this really big relief and recovery package to make sure that the recovery really stayed on track. But one thing that we saw was this remarkable increase in worker power. Like, it was, we had very tight labor markets. The labor supply actually went down in COVID because of things like people had more care responsibilities that they didn't otherwise have. People had health concerns, and so there actually were fewer workers out there. Employers, once the economy opened back up, really needed employers, and workers were really desperately needed, and I feel like there's been a lesson learned about worker power. Workers actually felt what it meant to be needed by their employer, to have their employer have to raise wages in order to keep them, because they could go to another job and get a job with better wages if they, because jobs were so available. So it did have this. I never would have thought it. I never would have thought that in the aftermath of the pandemic we would see resurgent worker power, but it actually did happen. And then you can see it playing out with, like, Starbucks, baristas all across the country organizing. What happened with the UAW and their big wins? What happened with UPS and their big wins? It's just like strike after strike after strike, and union organizing after union organizing after union organizing. We're seeing this resurgence in worker power. We still have a labor law problem. Like, there's still massive obstacles to organizing because of the things I talked about, but it's been a remarkable. My hope, what I think I see, is that we have seen workers sort of learning the lessons of collective action that I don't think will be easily put back in a box, and that's a really, really, really good thing.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll hear more about that a little bit later, Laurel. But I want to go to you, Pam, to talk about these laws. You're from West Virginia. We all think of Matewan,
Yep.
All the organizing. That's the kind of center for organizing and learning how. But I want you to talk a little bit about what's happened there. I mean, what we are seeing is, I guess in 2016, West Virginia got its first right to work law, which is really the right to not work in good conditions and have any money. But that happened. and that affected people's ability to organize, people's ability to get the wages that we deserve. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the impact of that particular law, but also give us a sense. I mean, you've organized low-wage workers, you've organized their families to support organizing, and so I wonder if you could give us a snapshot of what it looks like in West Virginia, and then talk a little bit about right to work.
I'll tell you, Roz, it didn't just happen. Reverend Barber talking about them strategizing and, them taking it long term. And a lot of y'all probably remember when they busted the airline union, when they busted the airline pilots union, when they were working them 24 hours and them sleeping in bathrooms and everything else. Well, I was jumping this high. Where is your brothers? Where's the UMW? Where is the AFL-CIO? Where are all of them to stand with them? It wasn't like that, And once it started, it was a domino effect. It started with them, but then it just kept going. The UMW, AFL-CIO, they're not as powerful as they used to be, And a lot of unions that they done away with. And so they done away with those unions and in the UMW, but there is still a lot of coal coming out of West Virginia.
Yes, that's right.
But what you don't realize is when they broke the union, we got 2 union mines. We got all kinds of non-union mines. We got men, boys, going in the mines now for $15 an hour and think they're getting a week's vacation, they got benefits. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And and the strategy is after they started closing the mines and they would close a mine, union mine, but then they would open it back up, non-union. And then all of them got together and they called it Friends of Coal. You know how if they put a pretty word on something, you better look at what's inside. Yep. Because I guarantee you, ain't no cream in that Oreo. I guarantee it. You check out some of these Patriot Acts and other things we got, and you start looking and seeing what's inside of it and what's being took away from us.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I wanted y'all to know that there is still people in there, but they went from having paid vacations, full health care insurance, all kinds of benefits to go with a living wage. I was raised a coal miner's daughter. My dad and my grandparents would be turning over in their grave right now if they would see what they have done to West Virginia. And then they turn it into a right-to-work law, which I'm like I'm like Dr. King. That's a farce. It's just like I said with the words, just pretty words, out there, Right to work my foot. That's a right to steal your wages and to rob you and to keep you poor is what that is. Ain't no right to work. It's a right to take your benefits, take your rights away, is what that is.
Right.
And then, the minimum wage. I call it the two hash brown wage. 2 McDonald's hash browns, $3.49 a piece. We're working an hour. I got a woman who got 5 kids. She said, I make with the wage I make, I can't even buy the special of the that I made today. I can't even buy what's on the special, and I got 5 kids. It's a strategy.
Yeah.
To keep the unions out. And I'll tell you what, a lot of these restaurants and service workers and stuff, the reason they're having to work 2, 3, 4 jobs, a lot of them, this is what they've got to do. They'll give them 14 hours, Right now, you're lucky if you can get 24 hours in a restaurant because they've done hired 10 or 15 people that they're giving that to, and that way they don't have to give no benefits. They don't even have to give you a break or a lunch.
They don't. They don't.
Mm-hmm. You know, they don't offer you. No, you don't. They don't. You don't. You're just trying to survive.
That's right.
You know, and you know it makes me so mad when I wonder. You know, I'm like you. I see, you know, this, you know, that. But to me, they started in the middle.
Yeah.
If they didn't start at the bottom, and we're the heart of it.
That's right.
You left the heart out.
That's right.
And nobody will mention that. They're like, oh, we're getting these. Yeah, your business owners are getting great. Your corporations are getting the contracts and everything.
Yep.
Most of you workers, either they already got their work, or they got contract work. And nobody mentions us. Nobody talks about us. Right. They talk like, oh, it's just great out here.
Right.
You know, when you talk about us being the essential, that's because we're the bottle washers and we're the diaper changers and we're the mattress changers and everything else. It's what we are. And we're expendable. Yeah. That's why we were called out. It didn't matter if we died.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't matter if we died.
Right.
Essential, my foot. We're expendable.
Yep.
We're collateral damage.
Yep.
It's what we are.
Slavery.
And, you know, it just makes me so mad that it don't have to be like this. And that we are worth. We are worthy. We work hard. We are worthy. We deserve it. And I'm like you, Ross. If it takes unionizing for us to get our worth, I'll tell you what, I'm like Reverend Barber. Hey, election day, we don't hear nothing from them. Let's call a national strike. Let's everybody sit down.
Yeah.
They won't want to listen to us, then change your own diapers, change your own stuff, clean your own house, cook your own dinner. We're done. We have had enough.
Yes.
So Pam, you're not just mad, you act.
I do more than just talk.
I know it, you act. You organize and you act.
Yeah.
That all over West Virginia for your work. Yes.
Absolutely.
You do. Absolutely. Y'all should know that. This is the act. So I want to bring in Laurel Ashton, who has been an organizer for a long time. She started young, but she's been an organizer for a very long time. And it goes back to what you were talking about, Heidi, earlier, about how organizing is expanding, and it's expanding in different ways. Mm-hmm. And workers are organizing in places we never thought they would do, and organizing stronger, larger, more than we ever thought. And that's the kind of organizing Laurel is doing right now. Mm-hmm. Now in the South, there's a new, let me get this right, a union of Southern service workers. It's building all over the South, across industry.
Oh yeah.
And and Laurel's previous work before that was with the Fight for 15 in its earlier days, and in a place in North Carolina that had some of the best outcomes in the country. So I'd love for you to talk about the strategy of that work, and also to just talk about your experience, but also let's bring it back to how you've been able to, in that work, incorporate folks of faith and clergy and what difference that's made. Mm-hmm. If you could talk about some of that.
Yes,
That's not much.
That's not much. Yeah. Well, I have a lot to say about all that, so if you need to just tap my arm
like that,
to have me quiet down, please do. I love this question about the role of faith leaders, because I'm in this room with a lot of faith leaders and a lot of soon-to-be faith leaders. So this is right to the point. So I hope that if nothing else, the main takeaway here is there a place for you in this movement? Yes. Yes, we need you.
Yes.
And before I get into talking a little bit more about what that role can look like, what that role has looked like in the work that I've done, I first want to state the obvious, which is that there's a role that you actually don't need to do, which is bring God into this movement, because the workers have that covered. Service workers, the workers that I work with, understand that this is a moral fight that they are in.
Yep.
And God and their spirituality, for many, is the motivation. It brings them courage to take on a fight when the odds are very much stacked against them. So I organize with Southern service workers, so the odds are really stacked against them. The laws are against them, the politicians are against them, and these very powerful corporations are against them, but they are very clear that God is with them. But that is not always the public narrative around union struggles and around fights for higher wages. So that's the first thing I want to talk about in terms of the role of clergy in these movements, is that the moral authority that clergy bring can help change the media narrative and the public narrative of these fights. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the types of organizing. Heidi has already shouted out a number of the exciting movements that are really growing and expanding right now. But some of y'all might have heard that fast food workers just got a $20 minimum wage in California.
No.
What? Amazing. And that is because of a decade of organizing that they did.
Right.
And that just was implemented this week. And the way that the media is talking about that is they're talking about inflation, and they're talking about how this is hurting competition. What? They aren't talking about how this is going to transform the lives of people who are struggling to meet their basic needs.
Right.
And so the role of clergy when they join these movements is really, it can help provide a framing that is the truth of the movement, but that corporations have a lot of stake in keeping out of the framework that we receive, out of the media, which is that this fight is a moral necessity, and that it is a fight for the dignity of people. And by clergy being present, being visibly present, and providing that framing, it helps have that be part of the conversation in a way the corporations are doing their damnedest to keep it from being the conversation that we're having. I also want to just talk, and this might seem small, but it is really big, a tactic that we have used in connecting with clergy because of the moral authority that they bring. It really acts as a protection for workers. So when workers are out on the strike line, I promise you the police are treating them different when clergy are there. The media are treating that story differently when clergy are there. We have clergy do walkbacks with workers, is what we call it, after they've been out on strike. They go back to work. We have a group of community leaders with them to explain the laws, remind them that, yes, it is illegal to retaliate, although they still do it, and they do not face the consequences that they should. And when clergy are part of those walkbacks, we have seen workers be less retaliated against. It is a meaningful contribution when clergy are there in these fights in a very, very tangible way. The next thing that I want to talk about is also the role that clergy have in the pulpit and among their own congregations. So workers, their lives do not end when the shift ends. And sometimes unions forget about that, but workers go home, perhaps to a rent that they can't afford. They're drinking water from the tap. Perhaps they're part of those 46 million that have unsafe cleaning water. They're sending their kids to school that is under-resourced with too large of classrooms. And on the weekends, where are they going? They're going to church, or they're going to temple, or they're going to mosque. They are part of these faith communities. So in your congregations, there are workers who are struggling. And we can never forget that, you have a responsibility as a faith leader. I feel that I have quite a responsibility as an organizer, and I can only imagine the responsibility that a faith leader feels that they have towards their congregation. And I imagine that if you're in this room, it's because you understand that taking care of someone's soul isn't just about getting them into heaven. Pam was talking to me yesterday and saying we need a little bit of heaven here on earth. And it is moral leaders' responsibility to help make that happen by being in the streets with workers, by being with them in the struggle and in their struggle to make changes in their own lives. So we're really in a historic moment right now. Public support for unions is higher than it's been since 1965. Among folks who are 30 and under, it is the highest it's ever been recorded to be. That's amazing. Yes. Unions are actually one of the very few institutions that are improving in how people feel about them right now. And I really think that this is because the crisis is undeniable, and we all feel it in our everyday lives. Our basic needs are not being met. Cindy is one of our members in Atlanta, and I think that her story really shows the crisis so well. I can say a lot about her. I'm just going to say this one thing. She's been at Waffle House, a billion-dollar corporation, for 29 years. 29 years ago, her wage was $2.90 an hour. What do you think she makes today? $2.90 an hour. And we talked about that wage theft. Waffle House is stealing from workers left and right. So generally, she has $0 on most of her paychecks. So do you think she's able to pay for gas, for rent, for food for her family? No, she is not. And that is not an uncommon story. And so the crisis, we are feeling it and recognizing that we want to support organizations, workers being able to come together to fight, because we know that, excuse my language, pastors, we are being screwed over, and we need an organization to be able to fight back together. And that's what a union is. All it is workers coming together, be one voice, to stand for with each other, to make things better in their lives. So, we are facing super exploitation, and it's just not a few of us. It is so many of us. Right. So of course, as public opinion is increasing, what we're also seeing is a massive wave of worker organizing. Like Heidi was talking about the impact of the pandemic. We talk about, yes, wages have increased, but I promise you it wasn't employers saying, I have realized that workers are just worth it. Right. There was an unofficial strike that took place during that pandemic. And workers said, if I'm gonna earn less than it takes for me to pay for my child care and my gas, I'm not going into work. Yep. And employers were forced to. This is that labor power that people felt. Were forced to make changes. Right. Yes, the Great Resignation. Yes, sir. Right. And the term essential workers, what it does is it actually reveals a truth. Right. Is that most jobs are not necessary. The jobs that are necessary are healthcare workers and grocery store workers and food service workers. Yeah. Our economy runs on them. Right. So it actually was this moment of consciousness that we broke through, created this schism that you just can't close up, where people realize, oh, I keep this economy going, and I'm making $11 an hour without health care, with my wages stolen, with disrespect every day from the boss. You can't just forget about that realization. So we are seeing existing unions, take on bigger fights and taking more risks, like UAW, the contracts that they won last year. Goodness. Look it up if you haven't looked it up. And now they're coming to the South to get organized. Yeah. But the thing, but the thing that I am even more excited about is that unorganized workers are organizing themselves. And maybe then they're hooking up with a union, but many are organizing themselves. The Starbucks workers, Amazon, we've heard of many have, okay, thank you, sir. All right, I'm gonna close out quick, but I'm just real curious. I'm mostly about the Waffle House workers. How many of y'all have heard about Waffle House workers getting organized? Okay, I see one. We're gonna work on that. I want all y'all raising your hands next time. But so just to recap, we need y'all in this movement. Your moral authority has tangible results in how workers are in this movement. You help change the conversation, and you need to be talking to your congregations about this, because there are struggling workers in those seats, and your words may just give them the courage to get with their coworkers and start getting organized. Yep.
we talked a lot about, and we're running out of time, and we talked about policy. We talked about policy making the changes that are needed right now. What can people in this room and in congregations do to change policy?
Vote.
Vote, exactly. Other things. I mean, I think that, like in my experience, that I think if people talk to their congregations about the issues and then what they can do, that's not taking us over the 501c3 line, that's giving people information. And so I think we need information in our congregations about what policies can change things.
That's right.
And then I think in this room, we need to shepherd that.
Yeah.
There's so much power in this room that is untapped. And we got to get past the risk factor. We got to just move ourselves and our congregation to make the changes that that these panels have talked about. So the one other question that has been asked throughout is about the one question that we would ask of these candidates.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody got any questions they would ask? Or any statements they would make to them? That's a little bit more dangerous.
I got a question.
Okay, good. Not a statement to them. Good. No,
Not
just
a
joking.
statement.
No, a
A
question.
yes or no question.
Okay.
Because we're not talking about 15 anymore. Are you going to pass a $25 minimum wage? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, what's the timeline that we're going to be holding you accountable to?
All right. That's good.
Get it?
Good. Are there other questions folks would ask a candidate?
I'll go, and it's along those lines. Like if you ask both presidential candidates what they want about workers and unions, they'll both say, I support workers' wages, I support unions, and so you have to ask the specific, what would you do? And that's the thing, like, would you support this minimum wage bill? And on the union front, the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, would go a really long way in terms of restoring workers' real rights. So it's like, okay, would you support the PRO Act? We know Biden is on record for supporting it. Trump has not talked about it, but like that's what I would. That's how you hold them to the. Yeah, exactly.
Are there other thoughts about what you'd ask a candidate?
I would have a modulation on something Anthea said this morning, Anthea Butler. What does it mean to recognize the humanity of the workers? And what kind of thriving, flourishing life would you want for workers? Not how they can just make it week to week, but what does a flourishing life for a worker look like for you? And while I have the floor, let me just say, I think it's important for those of us who have people in front of us, whether we're clergy or others, to try to change the narrative, change the perspective on which we look at labor, and stop thinking from the position of owners and start to think from the position of workers.
Yes.
So much of the narrative is about the concerns of owners, their profit margin, and not about the workers. And it's a new thought for many people to think about the condition of workers. And I think it's important for us to make the narrative about the condition of workers the driving point of the conversation. How are the lives of workers honored in the work? Work has to be redeemed. Work is not a good in of itself. It has to be redeemed. And so I think we have to remember that work has to be saved. It has to be drawn from death toward life. And if work brings people to death, it's not good work. And so we have to be asking that question, what kind of work speaks life? And what kind of work just means death? And so the conditions of workers have to now become the central part of the narrative before we start talking about profit margins and viability of companies and companies sharing, what stockbrokers get and what shareholders get. How are the workers being treated?
That's right.
That's right.
Would you like to weigh in here, Pam?
For me, I would want to know, when are you going to raise corporations' taxes instead of putting all the burdens on us?
Yes, ma'am.
When are they going to pay their fair share? When are we going to be able to have programs because they aren't getting away with robbing us and putting everything on us?
That's right. That's right.
When are you going to raise them, make them pay their fair share? That's my question.
Wow. So So these are wonderful questions. Let's tell our panel how much we
Good.
enjoyed them.
Did you hear somebody